They're ambitious, they're cold-hearted and calculating. They take all the benefits of monstrous strength and all the benefits of advanced civilization and combine them together. And best of all, they're part snake. Today I'm talking about the Yuan-ti. Someone on Reddit requested that I make a video about Yuan-ti, and they happen to actually be another one of my favorite monsters. I have a couple regions that I've built that they feature very prominently in substantially different ways. So I'm really excited to talk about them because Yuan-ti are one of the best monsters to take a narrative approach with. They have a really, really rich culture and lore around them, and their intellect allows them to be really deep and complex enemies. We're going to talk about their uses in campaigns and the roles they can play on a broader, large scale. We're also going to talk about the kinds of encounters you can potentially use to feature Yuan-ti in ways that take advantage of their narrative traits. And then we're going to talk more specifically about how you can actually run them in combat in a way that's narratively satisfying and more interesting than just having them attack your players. So giving you tips and advice on how to run Yuan-ti to make them feel distinct from other monsters. Let's start with the role of Yuan-ti in your campaign or adventure. If you want to use Yuan-ti, there's a few questions you need to consider. First, you have to consider the kind of environment that the Yuan-ti are going to be featured in. The Yuan-ti are primarily meant for jungles, swamps, and deserts, areas where snakes, their closest relative, are frequent and common. Every environment gives you plenty of opportunity to flavor the Yuan-ti differently. Oh, cello, shoot. In each environment, you can flavor the Yuan-ti differently according to how that environment would dictate the growth of a civilization or the occurrence of a city. Pick a setting, pick an environment that you're excited about or that already fits into where your characters are going or can work as a neighboring region so that it's somewhere your players can potentially decide to go to or be led to. Once you've decided the kind of environment that the Yuan-ti are going to be featured in, you have to choose the sort of period of time that you're going to feature the Yuan-ti in. It's not about the period of time in your world, but the period of time in terms of the Yuan-ti culture. Yuan-ti, before they were these kind of snake hybrid serpentine monstrosities or abominations, they were just humans. They were this kind of deific society that worshipped the serpentine snake gods. They worshipped these gods because they believed, and rightfully so, that these gods would grant them power through worship. Initially, some of these cultures worshipped them through snake totems that they would have. Now, their culture is even more interesting because they didn't just worship out of a sort of deific fealty. These were a people that prized pragmatism. They were kind of cold-hearted and calculating. They worshipped these gods because these gods gave them strength. And so they sought more strength to grow their empire and probably in the early stages to defend themselves. And as they continued to grant more strength, they became even more fervent in their worship because they saw that their faith and the actions they took to enact the will of their gods was supported and rewarded by the deities they worshipped. Some of these practices, like cannibalism and sacrifices, were understandably not the kinds of practices that good societies would support, but because the Yuan-ti societies, even before their shift into becoming serpentine, were so pragmatic, they had no problems embracing these practices that they saw would give them strength and allow them to survive and even thrive. So with that in mind, with that understanding of what the Yuan-ti were before they became these serpentine hybrids that we know today, what point in the time of their culture are you choosing to feature them? Are you featuring a humanoid society that's worshipping these gods and slowly in the process of transitioning to Yuan-ti? Or are they at the height of their Yuan-ti strength and empire, where because of the strength they've been endowed, they have grown to massive, massive success? Part of the lore around Yuan-ti is that some of the most successful kingdoms were the ones that eventually became Yuan-ti empires, because these successful kingdoms were made successful by the kind of cold-hearted, pragmatic, calculating nature of the people in it. And it's that same nature that made them the perfect worshippers of these snake gods. So perhaps you're making them an empire in transition, becoming Yuan-ti, or perhaps you're taking an empire that's at the height of the transition when they've developed their magics that essentially allowed them to mate with snakes and become these magically enhanced and enabled Yuan-ti. So if you decide that they figured that out, then their empire benefits not only from all the advantages an advanced empire has, but also from the benefits of the monstrous strength that the Yuan-ti gained by serving their gods and acting in fealty and becoming like the snakes that they worshipped. Or perhaps it's an empire in decline. Perhaps it's an empire that the slaves are revolting against for their cannibalism and for the slavery practices. Or perhaps even further beyond that, the empire has long since gone, and all that remain are legends and stories and myths and perhaps underground cults that still worship. So that's the period of time. The period of time is super important because when you decide to feature them in that kind of rise and fall will influence so much of how they act and your campaign and what your players actually end up encountering. Now, alongside that period of time, you've also got to consider the details of their worship. That's the next question you need to answer. What is the state of worship within the empire? Now, this question is pretty tied towards the period of time, right? At the height of the empire, or in the rise pre the understanding of how they could actually become serpentine and become like the idols and deities that they worshipped, this was a massive, successful empire led by legendary warriors that were known throughout the land. This is kind of the cradle of civilization, or at least one of the apex civilizations of your world or setting or area. It should be thriving and successful because it's led by people who would do anything to succeed. And so, given this, is the practice of this snake worship, is it out in the open? Are there massive temples, or are we kind of in a different state where rather than massive temples, it's led by smaller kind of cults that are secretive, but perhaps not vilified, right? They're like these mystery cults that worshipped emperors as demigods that existed even in our own history. They're not necessarily evil or criminalized within their society, but because of their ritualistic practices, they do need to be kept under wraps. Or perhaps it's all to the extreme and it is vilified. People know what the Yuan-ti have been and how nasty some of their practices and actions have been in enslaving other cultures and using them for ritual sacrifices. So perhaps now any sort of snake worship or worship that's not within the pantheon of your world is vilified, and people, these cults have to be kept secret, or else they will be rooted out by the forces of good or the forces of other evil that only want worshippers to worship the pantheon that they approve of, and not these cunning, sly snake gods. And this question is really interesting because, like I mentioned, the Yuan-ti, they didn't worship out of fervent loyalty. They worshipped out of pragmatism. They worshipped because they received power. If one day they stopped receiving power, these people would likely have turned to other deities where they would have received that power. They had no specific loyalty to the snakes, or perhaps in your world they do. That's your choice to make about the kind of culture. But as pragmatic people, I think it's normal to interpret them as people that would easily change allegiances to whatever would grant them the greatest strength. These snake gods were just, unfortunately or perhaps fortunately for these people, just as cunning as their worshippers. They would give them as much power as they could afford to, while not giving them so much that they could then ascend themselves and overthrow the gods. Because for a lot of Yuan-ti worshippers, that was the goal. The goal was, through this strength, through this transformation, ascend to godhood, and they wanted to usurp the other snake gods and become part of this pantheon. And depending on how rich and how deep you want this pantheon to be, you could have it so that ascension is not altogether uncommon. In fact, this is actually mentioned in, I think, either the Monster Manual or Volo's Guide, that within the lesser snake gods, ascension can be relatively common and occur every 100 or so years, with lesser snake gods being replaced and everyone vying for more and more power, trying to become the chief deity of this pantheon. If you don't think that that's a fascinating internal conflict for this Yuan-ti monster culture, then, you know, I'm afraid we don't have the same, we probably don't have the same interests in Dungeons and Dragons, But I absolutely love that, and I think giving your players a chance to discover that and explore that through the campaign and learn about it over the course of their adventures is really cool and something strange that you don't really see all too often within D&D. With the snake gods and worship playing such a key role in Yuan-ti society, it's important to look at what their gods actually were, which gods they actually worshipped, in order to understand how they might act within the confines of your campaign or adventure. So I have some notes here that I'm going to grab that has some information on the gods themselves and how different Yuan-ti cults that worship these different gods would actually act differently from each other and engage in your campaign and feature in your campaign world differently than their other, perhaps, rival cults. Personally, I tend to find homogeneous cultures kind of boring, right? If all dwarves are the same and all elves are the same, then what's the point? I love adding variety into it. And I think Yuan-ti are typically portrayed as a kind of one-sided culture without too much depth. But they really don't have to be. There's 3 main deities that they worship, and each of these deities are so different from each other that I can imagine a fascinating city or empire of Yuan-ti at any stage with these 3 diverging worships that would lead to some fascinating inter-party conflict for your party to get embroiled in. So let's start with the first deity. Notes here, the first one is Dendar the Night Serpent. Worshippers of Dendar the Night Serpent terrorize their foes. They seek to inflict as much fear and dread as possible because the belief is that Dendar the Night Serpent grows more powerful by feasting on the fears and nightmares of other people, of denizens that I guess are subjected to its power. Next, we have Murshulk, Master of the Pit. This is the chief deity of the Yuan-ti, but he is slumbering, so the hold on his power is weakened because he is not currently present and not active within the world. So his worshippers, they sacrifice people to this god, or her, to this god, in hopes of reawakening Murshulk so the serpent can once more resume its rightful place at the head of the pantheon. And then you have Seth, the sibilant, or hissing death. And Seth's, it's hard, I have kind of a list, tough one to say. This serpent's worshippers, they scheme. They seek to grow the empire or expand the power of the Yuan-ti as many ways as they can, using whatever they need to. And they're not above working against the interests of the other cults to do so, because some of them believe that Seth is the rightful chief deity. Some believe it's actually an avatar of Murshulk that currently exists, and others believe that Seth has already defeated Murshulk, or is the reason Murshulk is slumbering, and that Seth should be the actual chief deity of the pantheon. And so they're probably going to be instigating and working against the interests of these other cults. And again, each of these gods are at the top of the pantheon. They know to lead their followers along and give them power and give them a taste, but not too much so that the lower ranks can't threaten them, so that the Yuan-ti below won't rise up and reach to them. And so you can even have a bunch of other cults within the Yuan-ti culture that worship these deities in part just to get their strength, but ultimately want to ascend to godhood themselves and might need to defend themselves from the true loyal worshippers of these deities in order to do so. And each of these different parties might want to work with your players, which brings us to the next thing to discuss, which is the last question: how will your party come into contact with the forces of the Yuan-ti in your campaign? So remember, Yuan-ti are cunning. The Yuan-ti, they're going to leverage their influence first, right? They're a powerful empire most likely, and if not, they have a lot of strength regardless. Even if the empire has fallen, they probably do well to consolidate their strength or find resources and operate in secret, because most of all, they're smart. They're cunning adversaries. They are not to be taken lightly. And so they have wealth and power to potentially influence your party. If the Yuan-ti in your world can provide a lot of gold to the party, I'm sure that's going to go a long way in convincing the party to work towards their interests, even if they're a little hesitant to. Because I know at least my players, they don't mind taking some gold up front, even if it means there might be more potential conflict in their future, because they always feel they can deal with that later on. And that's what the Yuan-ti are counting on. To that end, the Yuan-ti don't have to act fully evil. Remember, they're neutral evil. So their overall goals might be evil, right? They might on occasion sacrifice people or seek to enslave and dominate the world. But they want to reach that end more than anything. And so as these kind of cunning and ruthless, smart tacticians and strategists, there's nothing wrong with them acting honorably from time to time or lending aid out of the goodness of their heart in order to befriend promising warriors and mages and warlocks and bards even to potentially use their strength later on and sick against their enemies and help further their goals. In your campaign, if one of your players wants to play a Yuan-ti pureblood, or you want to create an NPC that can pass as human to more easily ingratiate itself with your party, Yuan-ti pureblood is perfect, right? They're Yuan-tis, so they have the snake blood, but they pass as human. They only exhibit a few serpentine features, like maybe serpentine eyes or scales on their back or somewhere on their body that potentially they keep hidden. And they're fascinating because you can decide and mold their faith in all the different ways we've discussed. Perhaps they've turned away from the Yuan-ti faith and have no interest in ascending to godhood, or perhaps they're the most cunning and ruthless of them all. And even though they're starting from the very bottom, that is what they want to ascend to. That is ultimately their goal. And as a player, I mean, what better goal is there than ascending to godhood? I think that's an awesome story for a player character. So that's a lot about their campaign uses. Next, I want to talk about the ways that you might encounter Yuan-ti, but first, I just want to talk about their hierarchy for a second, just so we all have a better understanding of Yuan-ti culture. Essentially, because of their worship of snakes and the way that they idolize these serpentine gods, the more you resemble the gods, the more you are snake-like, the more features of snakes and serpents that you exhibit, the higher within the caste system you are. So at the very lowest are slaves. Slaves can be any number of other races, but they have been subjugated by the Yuan-ti. They are meant for menial labor and nothing more. There is no purpose for slaves but to enact the will of the Yuan-ti society and build the empire that they seek to construct. Past that, you have the brood guards. Certain humans that perhaps exhibit potential, right? That are capable warriors or are interesting to the Yuan-ti for a variety of reasons, exhibit some kind of promising talent. They can be fed a special elixir by the Yuan-ti to try to exhibit snake-like feature and be converted into the Yuan-ti. But brood guards can lose their mind in the process, right? This elixir, perhaps it works some of the time, perhaps it's a perfect thing, but people can't always resist the willpower, like in kind of Dragon's Age, the Grey Wardens. So they're fed this elixir, and brood guards, they lose their mind, but because they have that strength, and because the elixir makes them, most importantly, unwaveringly loyal to the Yuan-ti, well, then the brood guards are perfect for serving as just one level above the slave, guards of the Yuan-ti, guards of where they lay their eggs, and guards within the cities. It's not exactly the most interesting job for Yuan-ti because they seek to ascend and grow higher, but this forms the backbone of their defenses. Now, past this, you have the actual I think, center and core of their society that's respected, or at least not seen as less than. And that is the purebloods, right? These are humanoids. They, like I said, only exhibit a few snake-like features, but they're treated fairly because Yuan-ti, again, they're pragmatic. They're not going to just be, racist for no reason. They don't care. Everyone can make an equally good slave, but if you're serpentine, you're better. Even the Yuan-ti purebloods, who are humanoid, can serve their purpose as spies or diplomats that humans and other humanoids will feel more comfortable with. So they have their place in society and therefore are treated fairly, just well enough so that they are content. One level beyond that, you have the Yuan-ti Malisons. Now, these are the most common enemies that I think you as a GM might confront your player with. And they're really cool because they're kind of imperfectly transformed. They're halfway or part of the way through the transformation process of becoming serpentine. And it's either kind of their hands or their head or their lower body that is serpentine in nature, while the rest still retains its kind of humanoid original form. One level beyond is the Abomination. And these are really the top caste. They're the highest caste within Yuan-ti society because they are fully transformed. They are humanoid serpents through and through that have gained the benefits of the strength of this transformation. And so they are the leaders of the society. And if your players encounter them, they will be feared. There's one more kind of Yuan-ti we need to talk about first. And these are found in Volo's Guide to Monsters. All the other ones are found in the Monster Manual, though there's some great other types in Volos that fall within this caste system. But lastly, only in Volos, the anathemas, Yuan-ti anathemas. They aren't the highest caste, they're the top of the caste pyramid. They're not only fully transformed, so they're already past abominations, because they were abominations, but they were then, through their connections, through their dealings as the most capable leaders, empowered by a ritual to gain greater size, greater intellect, even more strength. Some of them have like 6 heads or other features that you can come up with. And at this point, they're demigods, right? They can have their own cults. These are the people that when they say, I want to ascend to godhood, they stand a good chance of doing so because they have the resources, they have the backing and the followers, and they have kind of everything they need to do just that. It's just a matter of time and their plans coming to fruition or being foiled by your party. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about Yuan-ti encounters, right? How can your party actually encounter the Yuan-ti within this campaign world? We figured out where they can fit in and the different ways you can use them, but now we need to make it practical. We need to make it so that your players actually meet them, and the meeting is compelling. It's fine if the lore is compelling and the ideas are compelling, but the actual experience of meeting the Yuan-ti within the world has to be compelling too. So let's talk about that. My favorite way, I think, and the coolest way to integrate Yuan-ti, which makes them from the beginning more than just a monstrous race that you encounter in like a random encounter or in a straight fight, is social encounters. Social encounters are the perfect way to start an encounter with a Yuan-ti to make your player think about them a little differently, right? If they're not 100% immediately vilified, or if they are and the Yuan-ti are smart and they use purebloods, there's a lot of really interesting things they can do to try to gain support and grow their society through means other than just force of arms. Again, Yuan-ti are smart. This is the most important thing about them to remember. They're smart, they're cold, they're calculating, they have everything they need to succeed. Your players and the other factions in the world are the potential wrenches in their plans. So, with that in mind, perhaps the Yuan-ti are doing what they can to ingratiate themselves with other parties. In a more political campaign, they might send a diplomat with favorable trade terms to a neighboring kingdom in order to encourage a friendly and non-hostile relationship. They might be helping the downtrodden in a really poor part of town or a place where perhaps there's strife in the kingdom and the lower caste that is poor is rebelling or starting to grow and have unrest at the way that they're being ruled over. The Yuan-ti, they've got a path to power. They've got resources. They might encourage and embolden the downtrodden with their worship or even just with pure resources provided to weaken neighboring kingdoms that the Yuan-ti plan to eventually subjugate. And if your players want to take down the kingdom, perhaps there's a Yuan-ti diplomat or aide sent to help them, or even squads of Yuan-ti that can work with them. And then finally, right, the Yuan-ti need guards. They need not only brood guards, but temple guards and guards of more important stations within their society. So perhaps they host tournaments, because the Yuan-ti, they want to find promising fighters and wizards and druids and rangers in order to make them either become Yuan-ti or bring them and break them to their will to serve the ends of the Yuan-ti. So a competition with plenty of prizes is the perfect way to trick your players into something where they're going to be getting in above their heads and might not even know it from the start. A simple competition can turn into kind of a talent hunt for the Yuan-ti, where the winners, not only do they get all these prizes, they get a special potion that will try to transform your players into Yuan-ti purebloods or subjugate them. And even if they win, even if this does realize, it's not just the threat of it that's interesting, but there's a whole possible threat of your players figuring out how to revert those changes in themselves if they do not manage to resist it. Those are a few specific social encounters, but overall, right, they're going to be brainwashing people, they're going to be charming people. Perhaps you find Yuan-ti torturing people for information to try to understand more about their enemies or rival cults. I think that's always fascinating, finding two groups of Yuan-ti clashing. Perhaps your players decide to let them fight it out and just take over the winnings, or perhaps you make one party seem weaker and have that group of Yuan-ti offer your players a reward for helping them out. And all of a sudden, your players will be a little more invested and a little more involved and want this Yuan-ti to succeed, even if it's a tenuous alliance between your players and what is, by all senses, it's just a monster. It's a really smart monster. The core here is understanding that violence is just not the only option available to the Yuan-ti. they have many, many other skills. They can use violence when necessary. Ultimately, they'll want to, right? Because they'll want to have these sacrifices. So you can have your players find this cult that's trying to sacrifice someone to feed the gods and reawaken the chief deity of the pantheon, Mirashalk, like we mentioned, or otherwise use it to empower their serpentine bloodline. Or perhaps you find guards that are in a breeding ground, and if your players encroach on it, well, violence might be their first reaction, right? This is kind of territory that is their own, so they might not be so willing to talk immediately. They might just strike first. But it's not the only tool in their arsenal, so as a DM, you've got to take great care to think about more than just, hey, my Yuan-ti are going to attack the players. There's many other ways that the party can be handled, right? And we've talked about money as a big one. They also have magic. We'll talk about how they can use their magic in the combat section of this video, but they do have magic. That is a place that they can turn to. That is an avenue they have open to them. And very importantly, they have stealth. They are exceptional at stealth and intrigue in general because they are smart and ruthless and calculating. So if you want to go in that direction and find an encounter that way, perhaps your party finds a group of humans or other humanoids being kidnapped by the Yuan-ti. And they don't even know they're Yuan-ti. It's just cloaked humanoids that when you pull back their hoods, you find that, hey, they're moving across the ground weirdly. Oh, and under their robes, they're slithering, or below their hoods, they have serpentine eyes or scales along their cheeks or heads. That's totally doable and really interesting, and something the players might not see coming. From your players that just seem like bandits or something might turn into much more than that. And because of their personality and the way that they operate, they have no honor, right? They'll ambush, they'll strike first, they'll kidnap, they'll do whatever it takes to win because they don't care about honor and loyalty and all these other things. They'll do whatever they can to get the best chance at winning and the best chance at accomplishing their goals. And unlike a lot of monsters, that even includes patience. Patience to study their foes, study your party. Send a spy, whether it's a Yuan-ti pureblood or a humanoid that they've paid off to travel with the party, help the party, befriend them, and then report back with all the information they can about the party so that when the Yuan-ti are really ready to engage, capture, or work against the party that's already made an enemy of them, perhaps, they'll have every countermeasure they need prepared, or at least quite a few countermeasures prepared. And in those cases, your party is going to be in for a tough fight. Because as we get into the combat section, more than anything, the Yuan-ti are a tough, dangerous adversary. And remembering that will make them very, very memorable for your players and extremely compelling in a narrative sense too. So I'm keeping my notes here throughout the rest of the video just because it's easier. Combat, right? We're in the combat section. I know it's been a long video. Hopefully you've learned some awesome stuff so far, but let's talk about, not just campaign uses, not just possible encounter types and how your players might engage them, but how they'll actually function in combat when shit finally hits the fan, when it's just a few Yuan-ti or one Yuan-ti and your group of players. What is that going to be like? How can you run the Yuan-ti so that they're interesting and distinct from other monsters? First of all, like I said, I've been emphasizing it. They're smart, they're cold, they're ruthless. And so as a DM, you get to be as smart and cold and ruthless as you can, right? Play it to your full extent. There are some places where perhaps it makes sense to fudge or to take it easy, not to add more monsters if your players are, already getting slaughtered. Don't do that with the Yuan-ti. Give it your all. Play it your hardest. Don't pull your punches. If you know that the Yuan-ti would have countermeasures prepared, or would have other enemies waiting, or would have an escape route, use everything. These bastards, they're dishonorable. Sorry, that's a little intense. These awesome, cool snake humanoid monsters, they're mean, they're evil, they're dangerous. Use everything at your disposal, everything they would have at their disposal to make your party members suffer. If you do cross the Yuan-ti, they are an advanced humanoid civilization that's risen to the apex, and then through this worship of these serpentine deities found an even greater path. They didn't care. They decided, hey, we're going to become evil because evil is the best path to power that we found. And at the top of society, it's possible that they're not wrong. So if your players are going to go up against them, don't let your players forget that. Make sure the characters in your group are in for a challenge. I'm not saying you need to pull out every stupid DM way of killing your players, but these encounters should be a challenge. Yuan-ti should be dangerous monsters. That's how I feel about them. And this is actually going to go in an interesting direction. One of the biggest reasons you can afford to not pull your punches in this is because the Yuan-ti don't want to kill your players. Why would they do that? People are so much more valuable alive than dead. Alive, your players and their characters, they can become slaves. They can be converted into broodguard and fed these special elixirs or sacrificed in a powerful ritual. To that end, they're not going to be just trying to kill your party members. They're going to be coming at them, trying to knock them out, trying to use nets to restrain them or constrictor snakes to bind them. They might use magic, like I mentioned. They have access to a ton of magic, like suggestion or charm person or polymorph, to make your players easier to deal with, right? They're going to try to avoid violence if they can, especially if they think it's not the best way to deal with your players. If your player characters have already demonstrated they're really tough in combat and the Yuan-ti know, they're not going to try to probably come and fight them head on unless they feel very confident about the violent approach. So instead, magic or poison might be a good way for the Yuan-ti to go, and if they have any advantage, the Yuan-ti will use it. Even if your party loses one of their players, there's still a chance that your party can get the player back by stopping the ritual or rescuing them or finding a way to, like I said earlier, undo the conversion process or the brainwashing or whatever you want the Yuan-ti to subject your players to. Because the Yuan-ti are so smart and want to drain every last point of like utility from the enemies they subjugate, that gives your players an opening to know that, hey, if the Yuan-ti, when they attack, they're not necessarily going to try to kill us. They'll be dangerous, but it's a fair challenge. You're not just stomping your players for no reason. And to that end, the Yuan-ti will even sacrifice lesser Yuan-ti on the totem pole in order to accomplish their goals. And so perhaps if a Yuan-ti pureblood has been tricking or has tricked your party and led them to an ambush and has been working with your party for a long time and now is abandoned and is betrayed by their higher-ups, perhaps your party's gained a new, unlikely ally, one hard to trust, but one that knows a lot about the Yuan-ti, that can help them in reclaiming their lost allies or in fighting back after suffering a loss. In addition, they'll probably target the most dangerous party member first, right? They'll seek to take people out of the fight that threaten them the most. And that can change along the way. That can change depending on whether the Yuan-ti have had time to study your party. But they're going to be going after those dangerous party members first. And in doing so, they're not just going to be using their own power. They're going to be utilizing the environment. They're going to be utilizing whatever other assets that they have at their disposal. They're not just going to honorably challenge you to a single duel. These aren't the people for that. Maybe orcs will do that. Not here. The Yuan-ti, they'll swarm you. They'll single target you with 5 of their people if they think that that's the best way to go. And that might be a little intense, but that's the degree to which you can go with Yuan-ti and be narratively kind of realistic within the fiction of what these monsters are all about. So as we take that cold pragmatism further, next, importantly, is, yeah, they'll sacrifice whatever they need to, but they'll also do their best that they can to survive. They'll retreat or flee if they feel that they can't succeed. You don't just pull one over on the Yuan-ti and then win. If things are not going in their way, they're going to run away. It's not cowardice. It's practicality, total practicality. It's the true definition of tactical retreat. They might just run all the way home, but most likely they'll run to another location or to another part of their lair where they have more countermeasures prepared or perhaps more allies waiting or some resource ready to try to help them get back into the fight or obstruct the path of the players so they stand a better chance of escaping. I think that when your Yuan-ti get bloodied, that's when you can start to think about the ways that they can escape and the countermeasures that they might have prepared. And they'll act on that when they have maybe a third or a quarter of their health left. That's when they're going to start to pull the plug, run away, and try to salvage whatever they can from their operation. And like I said, they'll have other countermeasures prepared. And here's one of my favorite ones for the Yuan-ti. The Yuan-ti, they can shape change, right? They can turn into a snake form, but when they do, they drop all their items. So this is a last resort thing for them to do. So maybe one of the countermeasures they have prepared is they run away to a den of smaller snakes that they have, places where snakes can fit into small holes that maybe your party can't. And as soon as they get there, they turn the corner or they cast darkness or go into darkness, they boom, shape change into a snake. Now they look like every other snake and they slither as fast as they can away into a hole. Now, I know from experience, your party will hate it when an enemy that they've been hunting gets away. They will hate it, hate it, hate it. You can't do this all the time. Yuan-ti are the perfect time to do it though. And because they'll hate it, they might be a little mad at you, but more than anything, they're going to want to kill the one that got away. Absolutely, for sure, you can count on it. So, use that as you will. Tread carefully, but know that it's a great way to kind of tug at your players. Rarely, but it works super well when you can pull it off well. And the Yuan-ti perfectly suited for doing this. Now we've talked about all of that. We've talked about all the advantages that they have. But here's the key weakness. They're arrogant, right? They're so smart. They're so cunning. They're so ruthless. And they think that serpents are the ideal existence. They seek to become them. And so anything that is not serpentine, right, even less than the purebloods, anything that doesn't exhibit any serpentine factors is less than. You can be a lizardkin, you can be an orc, you can be whatever. To them, it's all the same. You're not Yuan-ti, so you are less than. And so you are not worth them. You're not better than them. And so they are arrogant. And so in the gap between where their cunning, ruthless smarts meets their arrogance, there is an opportunity for your players to exploit. An arrogant Yuan-ti might not plan too many countermeasures in advance. They might know to escape when time is right. But if they were truly fully arrogant, maybe they don't escape right away, or maybe they've monologued for a little too long. The Yuan-ti, I think, makes sense as a kind of monologuer. They'll be cold-hearted and ruthless, but they think they're superior, they think they're above, and so you can play that up as much as you like. If you want your players to exploit their arrogance, make sure you make it obvious to them. And in combat, there's some incredible Yuan-ti monsters in both Volos and the Monster Manual, but you don't have to just use the Yuan-ti. You can use humanoids who are members of the serpent cults, or humanoids they have enslaved or turned into brood guards, right? Or are otherwise blackmailing to fight against the party. The Yuan-ti have many resources, and so they can hire mercenaries. They can do all of this as long as they find people who don't mind taking a payday or are sufficiently blackmailed into working for this evil faction. In addition, snakes, right? Giant snakes, constrictor snakes, swarms of snakes, other snake monsters that you find or come up with, they're going to want to use all that because they're, going to have those around. They're going to nurture the presence of snakes because they believe that they're valuable. And I think you're not in the situation where they see those beasts as fully sacred animals, because what they worship, it's not really just snakes, but it's these serpentine gods that are humanoid serpents or deific levels of power serpents. If they're stronger than these serpents, they're going to see themselves as higher and be willing to sacrifice and use them, right? So perhaps they have a really giant snake that they do kind of worship a bit. I think that's totally cool to do. But otherwise, that's just one more arrow in their quiver that they can, shoot at your party. Alright, so, that's the video. I think this has been long enough. Yuan-ti are awesome. I hope I've convinced you of the same thing. I hope you're thinking now about potentially using them, or if you were thinking about using them already, you have some new ideas into how you can use them in your games. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you go read the Monster Manual, and you read especially Volo's entry, because there's a ton in there to flesh them out further. They've got other weapon loadouts, they've got traits, they've got tables for generating different appearances for your Yuan-ti, and they've even got a map of a Yuan-ti temple in there that you can retrofit into a dungeon or make a central part of one of your cities. I think those are totally awesome, and obviously you're going to need the stats for the monsters anyway, so take a look and see what they can specifically do and look at those resources. But yeah, man, I'm sweating. That was a ton. I'm really excited about using Yuan-ti, and I just want to run more games now using them because, man, are they cool. So if you don't know what all this has been, this whole long video, and you've made it this far, thanks for watching. I'm Jeremy. This series is called Experience Gain. It's a series I'm making about how you can get the most out of your Dungeons & Dragons game. But yeah, I make a new video every Friday, and this is a special bonus Tuesday video because I'm stoked to have reached 100 subscribers, which it's not a lot, but I'm excited about it, and somebody requested it. And so if there's a video that you want to see, put it down below, and I'll make a video on it in one of the coming Fridays, or perhaps even as a bonus video.